Hey guys, my name is Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with FL Studio. So, leading off of the previous videos and talking about our collection of plugins that we have at our disposal, we're going to talk about distortion. Now, distortion can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. I may have already talked about that before because I talk about it rather often. It's once again one of the very artistic things that you have to deal with. So we'll just pull up the Fruity Blood Overdrive here on our synthesizer. And we'll kind of play around with it and listen to the things that it does. And we can decide if we want to keep distortion on it or if we'd rather leave it off. So first thing we have is basically the fundamentals of a distortion unit are taking some sort of gain to overdrive the signal. So we're turning up the signal so much that it damages it. And that's the whole premise of distortion. Actually, the whole thing started out from, I believe, when there were poorly made speakers, when electric guitars kind of first came out and started becoming popular. There were poorly made speakers that people noticed actually gave an interesting tone to the electric guitars just because they would distort it. So that's where distortion kind of came from. And it was the whole idea of the fact that they were running these speakers loud and it was kind of ruining the sound. But at the same time, it made the sound better. So that's what distortion is. So this is what everything is going to kind of be based off is our preamp, or depending on what you have open. If we have fast distortion, this is our pre, yeah. And if we try the, there's hardcore, I don't know, let's see. We have our distortion. So it kind of varies in terms of name, but keep in mind it's basically just going to be your preamp or overdrive or gain or something like that. So so that's what we're going to do. So we'll listen to this chord progression here as I turn up the preamp. So that was pretty harsh there. So I'm going to turn on the post gain, which kind of limits the amount of the loudness that it could come out at. So we could distort this. And that's kind of, the whole idea of distortion, what it kind of turns out ending up being like. So now we have a couple options here. Now these ones are very unique to the various distortion units that you have. In this case, we have the pre-band. Which, if you remember from our EQ video that we had a couple videos ago, we talked about the high cut, and that's basically what this is doing. It kind of just cuts off the highs before it distorts. And the color is kind of the tone of the compressor. Once again, remember the word tone. It's really fun. I could use it to describe basically anything in EDM. So that's what color does there. We have our post filter, which is basically just like a high cut right at the end of the distortion. So we could high cut before the distortion or after the distortion. And then finally, the last thing we have is this times 100, which basically just takes things up another notch. So now, you might be wondering what this is really useful for, but I'll show you right now kind of what you can do with this. And I actually chose a rather good thing to put this on, because when you put it on a synthesizer like this, you could actually do some pretty cool things to get a nice sort of flavoring to your sound. So I'm going to turn up the color here and turn down the preamp and turn the post gain back up. And now we're going to A/B it. I'm going to turn it on and off by clicking this little button here. So you could tell that really changed it. It added a lot of extra high end to it. And kind of brightened it up, and we can mess with the color as well to adjust it to our taste. Now here's a good example of one thing you might want to try as well. If you see this knob right here, this is basically our mix. So we could kind of balance between the original sounds. Now you got to be careful with this because sometimes it's not always in sync, which means you could end up with phasing issues. And if that happens right now, it'll be very prominent, and I'll describe it. Otherwise, we should be good. So it didn't end up having that issue, which is rather fortunate. But if we drop more advanced plugins on, we could quickly run into issues. So that's, despite the fact that this is rather short video, this is the whole premise of distortion. You just have, your gain, your pre-gain, your post-gain, and whatever filters you may have. This times 100 thing is unique to this distortion unit, and the color is kind of just the tone knob that you'll have on distortion units and stuff. So there's really not that much to cover. I think we could hardcore, like I kind of popped up before. We can kind of see the distortion here has some very interesting knobs. It has distortion, which kind of makes sense. And then we have these three other knobs that are unique to this distortion unit. So it's all just a matter of getting an interesting tone. But for the sake of extending this video a little bit, I want to kind of talk about distortion in other forms as well. So one of the things you could find is if we get our fruity compressor, we'll turn off the overdrive as well. And if I turn the threshold down and the gain up, make the ratio 30:1, release very fast and attack very fast. Remember we did this in our compression video, and I kind of talked about how it changed the sound a little bit. So if you listen now, it's actually doing quite a bit to the sound. It's distorting it, even though this is a compressor. That's because the type is hard. So if we change this, once again, we could change the tone. So we could get distortion from other areas as well, which is something that you need to be careful about. This is the unwanted distortion. So whenever you do too much compression, you will start to, whenever you do certain amounts of compression, you will actually just start to bring in distortion. And if you do too much, the distortion will become evident and you'll actually be able to hear it. In some cases, you'll actually get very subtle amounts of distortion that actually affect the tone in a positive way. So that is, like I said, if you balance it in artistically and correctly, then you could really add to your sound. But if you're not being careful and you just do too much compression, things will start to sound distorted, which is where you need to start being very careful about your sound. And it can manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. But one of the ways that I want to talk about now is clipping. And clipping is it's a very, I don't want to say obvious form of distortion, but it has a unique tone to it that makes it very easy to identify. Now, the type of clipping I'm talking about is digital clipping. There are various types of clipping out there, but the one I'm discussing is digital clipping. And this one has a very, very prominent sound. Let's see, what's the best way for me to do this? Okay, so this is my master volume here. I'm going to turn this down. But at the same time, I'm going to turn up the gain in a whole bunch of places on the synthesizer so that it starts to clip. Okay, it's not going to do it if I have the master volume down, so what we'll just do is set that back to the default, and let's see, I might be able to do it in my recording software. So let's see if this works. Hopefully this doesn't break anything. Okay. So it's a very rough sounding distortion, and it's something you need to be very careful to avoid. And now, in some cases, it's very bad to have that type of distortion. In other cases, like if you do hardstyle, you may actually seek that sort of distortion on your kick drum, for example. So I'll kind of show you for those hardstyle fans out there, kind of what you would do in terms of that. So we have our little mix. Let me turn down this stuff. Hardstyle gets a kick drum and drops distortion on it. And that's kind of how you would get a hardstyle kick, for those of you that are interested. But like I said, it's very artistic in terms of deciding whether or not distortion is good or bad. There have been times that I've been mastering a track for somebody, which is a process that you'll learn about later, where I took the track and it was basically my job to make it sound as good as it possibly could after they finished doing all the mixing. So basically it ends up as a stereo track, which basically is what you have whenever you download a song and you drop it into FL Studio, and it's just got the track there and you can listen to it. So basically that's what I was given, and I was supposed to do compression and EQ and also some distortion to it to make it sound as best as it possibly can. And you'd think that if you get a whole song and you start to put distortion on it, it would sound terrible, but there are ways that you could actually do it so it makes the song sound even better. Now that's a whole different topic in and of itself, and I could not possibly cover that right now just because it's very subtle in terms of how you collectively make all the decisions to build on top of each other to get a really good end result. So it takes very highly tuned hearing to kind of pick up the differences that you're making along the way. In the end, there's a big difference between the final product and the original sound, but the individual decisions themselves are very, very minute. So anyway, that's the whole idea of distortion and using stuff to kind of change the tone of your various sounds. You'd be surprised what distortion sounds good on. But my strongest suggestion to you is sticking it on regular instruments like synthesizers. Those ones tend to bode best with distortion. Drums tend to be a lot more finicky with distortion. You have to be but a lot more careful about the decisions that you make in terms of that. But anyway, hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button to let me know, or leave a comment down below with any questions or things like that you may have. Questions, comments, suggestions, whatever. But let me know down in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.